In this video, I'm going to show how I make the best fresh milled quick cinnamon rolls. The principal recipe will be in the description box down below. Thank you for watching. Okay, so I'm starting by warming my milk. I'm pouring 310 grams of milk into a small saucepan. Once it's warmed, I'm pouring that into my mixer bowl. With that, I'm pouring 85 grams of honey. You will also want to add your eggs in this step as well. I, for whatever reason, did not add my eggs in this step. I added in later, and that made it a bit harder with the mixing. So for the written recipe, it does say to add your eggs, your salt, and your yeast into your mixer bowl along with the flour, honey, and milk. We are intentionally leaving out the softened butter. I noticed that when I put if I use melted butter and I put it in at the beginning, I notice it takes a lot longer to form gluten. And so I'm gonna allow the dough to come together a little bit first before I add in the butter. Again, in this video, I was experimenting with adding things in at different times just to see if it would shorten the kneading time, but I found that it actually didn't, and the fastest thing for me I found is just to add in the milk, eggs, honey, the yeast all at the beginning, and the salt as well. The only thing that you don't add initially is the butter. So as you can see, this gets really messy before it comes together, which is fine, it's normal. Even when adding all of the ingredients in at the beginning, it does still take a while to come together, but as you can see, it did come together. I didn't have to add anything extra in order for it to come together. It just needed time. And so now that my dough is done kneading, I am going to take it out of my bowl and make sure I have a nice window pane. Okay, and that looks great. So I'm shaping it into a neat ball because I'm going to go straight into rolling out my dough. There is no first rise for this recipe. This is a one rise quick recipe, and so I'm going to oil my work surface and go ahead and roll this out into a nice rectangle. I should also add that while your dough is kneading, you should be making your filling. When I was actually filming this, I got distracted and forgot to make my filling while it was kneading. And so you'll see here, right before I went to go and roll it out, I realized I didn't have any filling. So I just covered my dough with a damp cloth and went to go and get my pot so I could make my filling. And so I have the butter in the pan, and for my sweetener, I'm using coconut sugar. I'm using 6 tablespoons of softened butter and 2/3 cup coconut sugar. I'm also going to be using 2 tablespoons of organic cinnamon, as well as 1 teaspoon of cardamom, and the cardamom is optional. I find that it adds a nice, warm, cozy flavor to the cinnamon rolls, but it is optional. I oftentimes do make it without it, but it adds a nice depth of flavor with the cardamom. Once everything is in my pot, I just give it a stir. This butter is softened, so I'm stirring it up gently, and then I just put it over low heat so that the butter can melt just slightly. I don't want it to be runny because I find that it's a lot harder to spread when it's runny. So I just want it warm enough for the butter to melt slightly and for all of the ingredients to be well incorporated. So don't put it on the stove and just let it sit unwatched. Make sure you watch it so that it only melts slightly, because I find that gives it the best consistency. And here I am rolling out my dough into a rectangle. Be mindful to make sure that your dough is even, and that it's not thick on one side and thin on the other. And then go ahead and take your filling and spread it over your dough, and keep about a 1/2 inch of the top of the dough without filling. You can see that 1/2 inch at the top there that is left without filling. That will allow it to be easier when it's time to pinch the seam of our dough log closed. When you're rolling your dough, make sure to make it as tight as possible. We don't want to rip the dough, of course, but we do want a nice swirl in our cinnamon roll, so we do want it to be nice and tight. And once we get to the end of our log, just go ahead and pinch the seam. Now it's time to cut our cinnamon rolls. I just use a knife because was the closest thing, but I do sometimes use floss, and I'll just mark off my cinnamon rolls just like I'm doing with this knife, so I make sure I have 12 cinnamon rolls. But you can use floss by just taking a strip of floss, putting it under the cut that you've pre-measured, and pulling the floss through the dough, and that would also work as well, but a knife works just as well. Just be sure that if you are going to use a knife, that you do gentle sawing motions, and instead of just taking the knife and pressing it down into the dough, we don't want to completely smash our cinnamon rolls. So do gentle back and forth sawing motions so that our dough doesn't get smashed. I find that pre-marking it really does help to ensure that we have even cinnamon rolls. And because I'm using a knife, it may look like my cinnamon rolls are a little misshapen on top, but when they rise, it puffs out and looks wonderful. While your cinnamon rolls are rising, it's time to make the icing. Add 4 ounces of softened cream cheese to your mixer bowl and beat that until it's nice and soft. Then add in 4 tablespoons of softened butter and beat well until both of those are nicely incorporated and there are no more lumps. Now add in a pinch of salt and 2 teaspoons of vanilla and 1 cup of powdered sugar, and blend well. Scrape down the sides of your bowl if needed and mix until there are no lumps and everything is well incorporated and you have a nice smooth icing. And this is what my cinnamon rolls look like after rising for about 30 to 45 minutes, and it is time to put them in the oven. Bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 to 30 minutes. I usually take mine out when the internal temperature of the outer cinnamon rolls are about 185. Once they're out of the oven, I like to ice mine straight away. I like for the icing to melt into the cinnamon rolls, but if you do prefer, you can allow them to cool before you ice them. And then to distribute it evenly, I like to just put a spoonful on top of each roll. That way I can make sure that they each get an equal amount of icing. And here is the finished cinnamon rolls. These are absolutely delicious, soft, pillowy cinnamon rolls, and the cream cheese frosting adds such a nice flavor. If you try this recipe, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching.